Okay, Nate. Today you would like to talk to us about your views on the criminalisation and future legalisation of cannabis.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a few arguments why cannabis should be legal. Do you know, I grew up around a bunch of tradies and stuff. All the guys I grew up around with were painters and mechanics and stuff, and all these guys smoked bongs, and other than that, they weren't criminals. They were guys who went to work and they did their work and they could do their work while they were high. And they weren't criminals, So, it's this excessive desire to punish people. I think sometimes people just want to inflict punishment on each other for silly things. Who does it bother? If some guy who pays his bills with money that he earns from his own job and looks after his family and has a stable life, smokes pot. What business is it of yours? You can make the argument, it's in his own best interests that cannabis be illegal, but I don't believe in protecting people from themselves. Once you start protecting people from themselves, you justify all sorts of oppressions of personal choice and agency. In my view, police resources should be spent on catching murderers and pedophiles, right? Police should be harassing murderers and pedophiles and real gangsters who are violent and are attacking other people and hurting and causing suffering to other people. People who want to go into the privacy of their own homes after a day at work and enjoy some weed should be left alone. Because, who is it bothering, really? But the future I envision, I can see where things are going. I've observed what's happened in Canada and America, and it's all very exciting, They have cannabis cafes now in Canada and America, and that's the future I see for Australia. I see in 10, 15 years, you'll be able to go down to the city and you'll be able to find a few restaurants where you can eat cannabis, and where you can smoke cannabis. Now, here's the thing. In this country, we have the Smoke Free Environment Act. So the Smoke Free Environment Act basically says that individuals who do not smoke have the right not to be exposed to harmful smoke. Now, I respect that policy. That is a fair policy. Non-smokers have a right not to be exposed to cigarette smoke. People should be in control of what they're exposed to, and if you're going around blowing drugs in people's faces, I've got a problem with that, because a sober person has a right to maintain their sobriety and to have their personal disliking for drugs respected. So when we talk about opening cannabis cafes in Australia, there's going to have to be something around the ventilation, because I know that with currently how a strict Australian policy is on smoke in the air, the government's not going to let us have these cafes in busy restaurant districts where there's smoke pouring out onto the street. And it's fair enough, because what if a child walks down the street, breathes in a big whiff of cannabis and is high? We don't want children, 6-year-olds, getting high. And what if a driver is coming down the street in their car and all this cannabis is wafting out of a cafe and the driver gets high? Because I will say, people shouldn't operate machinery while they're high. They shouldn't drive cars while they're high. It's one of the reasons I don't drive. I walk everywhere and catch public transport because I'm stoned all day. And I like to be stoned all day, so I prefer not to drive. And I do believe that you shouldn't drive too much when you're high all the time, because it can impact your cognitive functioning. So, guys who work on machinery and on forklifts and stuff probably can't smoke weed, but you'll find many of them do, and they manage to do their jobs just fine anyway. Do you know there's some suggestion that in some certain career positions, cannabis can be a performance enhancement? I work as a professional artist. I work on a computer. I'm paid to animate and to draw pictures, and I would absolutely say to you that being high helps me do that better. Because I'm relaxed and I feel creative, and when I'm high, my thoughts flow and I see vivid imagery in my head, and my imagery and inner dialogue expands and my consciousness expands, and I feel more creative in general. And when I get high, I come up with more scenarios. I write books, I write elaborate plots and stories for my books, and when I get high, all the ideas that suddenly start to come to me, all the different narratives, all the different scenarios that appear in my head when I get high, and then I put them into books. So, if you work in a position where you need intellect and creativity, cannabis might benefit you. It might make you perform better in the workplace, and it's like some people are getting into microdosing LSD because they think it makes them more intelligent and more mentally astute. Now, I'm into that sort of thinking. I'm really into whether drugs can enhance intelligence. So what I think we're gonna learn over the next 20 years of drug reform, which is coming, and if you're paying attention to what's happening around drug reform, you know these reforms are coming. So if you're not paying attention, pay attention. It's coming. You better expect it. But what we're going to learn is that we're going to change our cultural attitude towards drugs, and we're going to start seeing drugs as tools to further ourselves. We're going to see that people can take certain drugs and they can become more intelligent, they can become more creative, they can flow better, they can perform intellectual tasks better. It's really about intellectual tasks. But as we know, there are some drugs that help you perform physical tasks better as well. And we're going to start saying, well, is that such a bad thing? I use with regards to performance enhancement, I like to look at the career of Arnold Schwarzenegger and how performance-enhancing drugs have helped him propel himself to a point where he became the governor of an American state. And I've never known Arnold Schwarzenegger to go around in a roid rage bashing people. So we're going to start seeing these drugs as performance enhancements, and we're going to see that they're tools that can help us achieve higher intellectual and physical performance. But yeah, I don't believe in punishing people for doing menial things that aren't really bothering anyone. You can make the argument for a basics card that a person on welfare shouldn't spend any of their money on alcohol, tobacco or drugs, and I respect that to some extent because the money is coming from other people's tax dollars to finance this person's survival, so maybe they shouldn't spend too much of it on alcohol or drugs. But other than that, if a person is making their own money and they want to get high and they're not going around bashing people and they're not going around raping women and they're not going around abusing children, why can't you sit in your own living room and smoke some marijuana? Whose business is it? What I've come to realise is there's so many pushy people in the world who want to dictate to everybody else how they should live, and I think people should respect each other's personal choices more. So, I see a future where we can go to cafes and eat cannabis, and I want to open a cannabis cafe. It's going to be a bookshop. It's going to sell exclusively independently published books, and we're going to serve cannabis, and people, provided we can get around the Smoke Free Environment Act, people are going to be able to smoke cannabis in my bookshop. So it's going to be fantastic. So, I'm very pro the new cannabis economy and the new world that is going to emerge once we legalise cannabis. So there you go. There's some of my thoughts on legalising cannabis.